And we are live. We're live, Walter. Go ahead. All yours.
Good evening, and thank you for joining Global Exchange, IFCO Pastors for Peace, Respect Cuba, and the National Network on Cuba for this special webcast on Cuba and coronavirus with Cuba's ambassador to the United States, Dr. José Ramón Cabañas, and Dr. Melissa Barber, a Cuban-trained American doctor mobilizing around the pandemic in her New York community and assisting IFCO with building and strengthening the training of Black, Brown, and community-oriented doctors at the Latin America School of Medicine in Havana, Cuba, better known as ALAM. Welcome to the webcast, Ambassador Cabañas.
Thank you very much, Walter. Thank you for you and all the organizers of this opportunity.
My name is Walter Turner. I'm the president of the board of directors of Global Exchange and part of the administrative team of Respect. I'm honored to be with you this evening. We will leave some time for your questions and responses and make sure that you have contact information for Global Exchange, IFCO, and Respect Cuba. You can send your questions to the program by using the chat room on your screen. We are recording this program and it will be archived on the Global Exchange website. We will start with a pre-recorded segment with Dr. Melissa Barber and then return to speak with Ambassador Cabañas. Dr. Barber. Thank you for joining Global Exchange, IFCO Pastors for Peace, and Respect Cuba for this special webcast on Cuba and the coronavirus. My name is Walter Turner. I'll be your host for the webcast. I'm the president of the board of directors of Global Exchange on the board of directors of Respect Cuba. During the next hour, we will be speaking with Cuba's ambassador to the United States, José Ramón Cabañas Rodríguez, and Dr. Melissa Barber. Dr. Barber is a Cuban-trained American doctor who has been mobilizing around the impact of the pandemic in her New York community and working with IFCO Pastors for Peace to encourage more students to attend the Latin American School of Medicine and return to their home community. We'll hear first from Dr. Barber and then have an opportunity to speak with Ambassador Cabañas. There'll be time for questions and answers, and we'll make sure that you get contact information for Global Exchange, IFCO, and Respect. We will start with a pre-recorded segment with Dr. Melissa Barber, who was born in the South Bronx and who completed her medical training at the Latin American School of Medicine. She was a member of the ALAM contingent, which we call the Henry Reeves Brigade, which went on a medical mission to Haiti after 2010. She's currently working with the Interreligious Foundation for Community Organization as a program coordinator for the ELAM Medical Scholarship Program. She oversees recruitment and application. Dr. Barber, thanks for joining Global Exchange, IFCO, and Respect for this special webcast on Cuba and the coronavirus.
Thank you for having me this evening.
Good. When did you attend the Latin American School of Medicine in Cuba, and why did you decide to attend the Latin American School of Medicine?
Now, you really want me to tell my age tonight? I attended the Latin American School of Medicine. I began in 2001, and I graduated from ELAM in 2007.
Okay. And why did you go? The image sometimes that we get in the States of Cuba has multi-layered, but there was something that made this the right move for now Dr. Melissa Barber. What was that?
I think the background that I've had in community organizing and being an activist for the community was something that definitely led me to Cuba. I think the aspect of community medicine and the social medicine content of their curriculum for medicine, I think the idea of being able to be bilingual as a physician working in New York City was definitely important to me as well. I think the component of internationalism and being a part of the global world and the impact that Cuba was having on medicine was another important key for me to want to be there. Just the distinguishing role of Cuba in the world, in Africa, and all of what they've done for Africa to help them. I think also, too, just the reputation of Cuban doctors. They're some of the best doctors in the world. They're very well trained. I think the idea also of just a medical school program that was willing to accept, students that were from low socioeconomic backgrounds, students of color, female students, and also say, we're willing to educate the poorest of the poor and send them back to their communities to really be a resource for that community was something that was so important to me, that it was undeniable that I would go.
Did you know all of this before you went, or is this a culmination?
Most of it I did. I did a lot of traveling before I went to Cuba, so I did have some knowledge around Cuba's medical school, because I did want to do medicine in Spanish or a Spanish-speaking country, and I did want to do international medicine before I actually enrolled in Cuba.
Okay. We see over the last few weeks, and I think the American public and the global world has been their eyes have been wide open, that you see Cubans going to Italy at the height of the crisis, throughout the Caribbean, to Native Americans around the world. What is this about what's so distinctive about Cuba that has led the country to be a small country and not necessarily a rich country, to be in the leadership on issues of medicine and health, Dr. Barber?
I think, as I say all the time when I do interviews, I think one of the key things about Cuba and its revolution has definitely ingrained into its citizens the idea of internationalism. I think that whole idea of being one's brother and sister's keeper, that whenever there's a disaster, whenever there's a situation where Cuba can step in and help its, brother or sister nation, that it would do that. And I think that the goal of just the revolution and the idea of healthcare or health being a right to every citizen, education being a right to every citizen, I think those are idea pillars that they have always upheld. And so when you see, natural disasters taking place all over the world, when you see, that many countries have, citizens that are illiterate, Cuba literally steps in and says, we can do for you what we've done in the 60 years of our revolution, and we're willing to help. And so I think that just also, too, the basic idea of creativity, the fact that they've been cut off from the world for so long, has allowed them to be so creative and inventive in how they would move forward as a nation to survive. Mm-hmm. And so they've come up with all these radical, creative, witty inventions to sustain itself over the years. And I think that has been the mother of their invention. It's like they've had to internally depend on themselves to create for themselves, and to see that the goal of their revolution be something at the forefront of what they would do. And so they've been able to not only sustain themselves, but to also help neighboring countries throughout the world, whether it's been other poor countries throughout the Caribbean, Latin America, or Africa, and, even first world countries, as we see in this corona pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Now, Cuba, many years ago, President Fidel Castro, through a visit to the Congressional Black Caucus, put this offer out there that they would train students, Black, low-income, Latino students, etc. How many of these groupings of students have gone through ELAM? And what was it like to be in a medical training environment with people from 124 plus countries, Africa, Asia, etc.? What was it for Dr. Barber?
So we've been actually, IFCO Passage for Peace has been facilitating this medical school scholarship program for the last 19 years.
Whoa.
So we've been at it for a very long time, and we've kind of perfected that process and have been very, very lucky to encounter some of the most amazing young people to grab hold of this scholarship program. We have, at this point, we have 185 graduates in that have graduated from our program. We currently have 69 students that are enrolled in our program, and we're looking for more. So for those of you out there who are hearing this program and are interested in medical school in Cuba, don't give up on it. Give us a call and we'll definitely plug you in and see how we can make it happen for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think to your other question, in terms of what was it like, I think it was one of the most amazing experiences that anybody could ever want. A little about my background, coming from a boarding high school that was an international boarding high school. We were represented by about 23 or 24 countries at the time when I was in high school. And having that global cultural experience was definitely something that let me know that for the rest of my life and for the rest of my future, I definitely wanted to have a world view on many aspects in my life. And then also too, just my level of training. I wanted to be in an international setting. I wanted to be around other cultures of the world. So Elam was definitely just something that spoke to me, because I said, wait a minute, we have how many countries represented here?
Okay.
The fact that cultural exchange is an embedded part of our curriculum. So we have what we call cultural nights, where we have a week where we're learning about every single culture that comes to our school, whether it's their traditions in art, dance, food, history. So, you don't escape just getting a cultural view of what the world actually sees and what they live and what they experience on an everyday.
You're one of our heroes, or sheroes, and I should say, because I was reading the article that when 2010 earthquake hit Haiti, that you volunteered to go. And I was saying, I know she spoke Spanish, but I didn't know she spoke Creole too.
I don't. My friend, I keep trying to tell my friend Daoud that he has to teach me Creole, and he doesn't want to. So I learned enough to get by to be with my patients in Haiti, but
okay.
I still need to learn Creole.
You work with the South Bronx Unite, and I wanted to phrase these last couple of questions in a way to get us back home, meaning what skills did you bring back that you feel are really important addition to those communities of people you work with, those people who are most affected by the pandemic, as you talked about in the South Bronx, issues of asthma and diabetes and environmental pollution. What's made your return special coming from Cuba?
I think, oh my God, there's so many ways to address that question, because I think when you talk about just the level of skill set, right? Cuba is one of those amazing countries that will teach you medicine the way medicine is supposed to be taught, right? We still have the knowledge of how to do a proper history, how to talk to a patient, how to do a physical exam and actually sit through an exam and see what's wrong with that patient. And before you even take a lab, or before you even, think about, running off all these tests, you pretty much have a diagnosis of what's happening with that patient way before you even get to the lab state. And so your labs are your labs are the confirmation of what diagnosis you've come up with already. And I can't stress how important that is, because most times even as a patient myself, or being a mom to a daughter who has autism and epilepsy, to have sat in many, clinicians' offices and have them not even want to look at me, or not even talk to me, or, have sent for a lab, and from that lab want to write out a prescription without even explaining anything to me.
Gotcha.
It was like, are you kidding me? This is not how medicine is supposed to go. So I think that just being at that place where you can learn medicine properly and how it's supposed to be done is a skill set that's so invaluable, and something that I learned first and foremost from Cuba. I think secondly, when I think about just all the other skills that, I picked up, whether it was having a voice and being able to advocate for, a people, a community, my community. That was something that was very important for me, because I think that even when I got home and, like I said, again, sitting in, clinicians' offices for my daughter in her treatment, where many physicians had a God complex and thought that I shouldn't question what they were doing, or I shouldn't have a response for what was going on, or saying, well, I think you should order these labs because this is what's happening. And, having them look at me like, how dare you tell me or suggest to me? And so just being at the point where I was so adamant and being a fierce advocate for my daughter in that way, I think I learned from Cuba as well.
In this last piece here, Dr. Barber, the relationship between Cuba and the United States, particularly from the perspective of the United States, recognizing Cuba's right to self-determination, its sovereignty. This is something that has been a challenge since the days of the revolution, the Cuban Revolution. Why is it important, whether a person is a social activist, human rights, healthcare person, that something be done to change this relationship between Cuba and the United States? And you see some of the recent stories about medicines being cut off from Cuba. Why is it an important moment for humanity to change this, to address the issue of the blockade?
I think it's important because, like, as you said, just the exchange of information, right? So many of our communities, meaning Black and Brown communities, we suffer from things like diabetes, things like lung cancer, things that Cuba has developed vaccines and medicines for that we could definitely benefit from. Right. And, it's not about profit. Human lives are important. So I think that one of the things that Cuba teaches us is about humanity, right? The very fact that if I have something that you need, why not be a part of the exchange? Mm-hmm. So it's not just about, gaining from the United States, but it's about, what does Cuba have to offer us? What do we need to look at? How many models do they have that in so many of our communities we can look at and see them as models that would definitely fit what we need? And so even in terms of, education, literacy rates, there's a 99%, literacy rate. The fact that many of their population knows health literacy is important, right? How many people here in the United States know what medicines they're taking, why they're taking them, why, all the how and whys of what they have, and I think that the level of education that has been taught to Cuban people, like, these are models that we should definitely see here. Okay. And, even with the vaccine, Sema-Vax, Herbaproc P, to lessen the amount of, diabetic amputees that we see around here. I mean, these are all things that we can benefit from. Even with this, interferon alpha 2B, why would we see so many people suffering, so many people dying, and not change the fact that we can actually exchange and learn from each other on a global scale at this point?
In our last moment, Dr. Barber is throwing a surprise question on you here. He was my mentor. I met him through the suggestion of another friend of mine. And, I miss him dearly. Say something about, in our last minute or so here, about Reverend Lucious Walker.
You're going to make me cry. But Reverend Lucious Walker was definitely a man who was fearless in his capacity to love. I've never seen a 5-foot man have so much presence and so much voice. And I think we all, who knew him, loved him because his radical nature to love in such a big way, when nobody wanted to see Cuba for what it was and how amazing that nation was, he was willing to step in and say, we're going to fight and advocate for this nation to have its sovereignty. And we're going to keep doing this until we see change come. And I think to, really see so much of the impact that he has made in the United States, on Cuba, it's such a blessing to me to have him have been a mentor to me. I always call him Uncle Lou. So many of us called him Uncle Lou, but he was definitely a father figure to many of us who went to the Latin American School of Medicine program. And he was always adamant about, making sure that we knew that we were the ones that, everybody had been waiting for.
Gotcha.
He had made sure we knew that our communities were ready and waiting for us to come back. And he made sure that we knew he expected nothing less from us than to serve the communities that needed us.
That's absolutely beautiful. Dr. Melissa Barber, thanks for joining us on this special program sponsored by IFCO, Global Exchange, and Respect Cuba to talk about Cuba and the coronavirus. We'll be talking with you again soon, and we're also going to be talking a bit later with the Cuban ambassador to the United States. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. That was Dr. Melissa Barber. She is currently the program coordinator for the ALOM Medical Scholarship Program. I was just talking back and forth with the executive director of IFCO, Gail Walker, and Gail Walker explains to me that somewhere between about 185 to 200 students from the United States have graduated from the ALOM program. We're joined now by the ambassador to Cuba, José Ramón Cabañas, who has graciously made the time to talk with us, to have this important conversation about his country, and also to talk about this historic moment of the coronavirus pandemic. Professor Cabañas, Dr. Cabañas, Ambassador Cabañas, how's your family?
Doing well, Walter. What about yours?
Good, good. You can speak up a little bit and we'll hear you a little bit clearer.
Okay, we are doing fine. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for having us. Our regards to the organizers, namely Global Exchange, IFCO, Pastors for Peace, Respect Cuba, and the National Network on Cuba. I take the opportunity also to convey my message of solidarity to Dr. Barber. I mean, she's a unique person, a unique friend, and a great communicator.
Let's start so that we can address some of the very current issues. Last week, there was a armed attack on the Cuban embassy in Washington. I wanted to get a sense from you to give us an update there and to share with us what the diplomatic protocols are for the next steps in resolving this issue, being clear on what happened.
Yes, well, as you know, it happens April the 30th, 2 a.m. We were informed by our security people that a person with a rifle, assault rifle, AK-47, was shooting on the facade of the embassy. We came immediately. The person arrived by car. He parked in a prohibited area just in front of the embassy. He came out of the car with a Cuban flag, and he was yielding in front of the building. He threw the flag against the main entrance, I mean the fence, and then he returned to the car. He brought the rifle, and he had the first round of bullets against the facade, and then he changed position a little bit, and he has the second round. In total, 32 bullets were shot, against the facade. And then he went back to the car again. He brought an American flag, and he started again yielding in the middle of 16th Street, around 4 or 5 minutes in total. And then the police came and surrendered him without any resistance. Immediately, as you asked, we put in place the protocols, not only for our own people inside the building and our community as part of the embassy, but we also report to the local police, I mean, Metropolitan Police, Secret Service. We report to our people back in Havana.
And so the next diplomatic step, you've gone through the diplomatic step. What's the next step, Ambassador Cabañas?
The same day, we sent a first diplomatic note to the State Department with the details. We provided to the local police, the Secret Service, space to do their own research. I mean, they came in to our garden surrounding of the embassy. They came to the lobby. I mean, they were collecting evidence. The next day, we had a second note to the State Department informing about what happened, but also requested immediate response on that, and also to know the details, the details they collected, the federal agencies were collected, and also assurances that these things will not happen again. Of course, we need information about if this is an isolated individual, if he was acting alone, and the possibility of the next occurrence. You know, the first information we knew about that, it was simply the information that was leaked to the media. I mean, we never had immediate response from State Department, and the local police and the Secret Service provided limited information. They had to inform their superiors, and they were, I have to say, that they were looking for evidence until midday that day. I mean, several hours they were working here at the embassy. We recently received information from the State Department in writing about some details. I have to tell you, quite frankly, most of them already known through the media. But from the very beginning, we have been requested to have a conversation on this. I mean, to have a dialogue. This is a practice. I mean, when things like this happens, local authorities are in contact with the government of the attack embassy or the attack diplomat. This is it should be a bilateral process through a conversation and through joint research, which should clarify what happened. Okay. As you remember, we have an MOU signed, I mean, Cuba and United States on law enforcement. And then that document provides, you know, like an umbrella space to have that kind of conversation as we have done in the past.
Okay. Let's move and talk a bit about coronavirus, COVID-19, and how it's impacting Cuba and its citizens. Perhaps share with us some numbers, but maybe more importantly, talk a bit about how you've addressed issues of food, how you've addressed issues of isolation, the elderly. And at the same, can you talk a bit about tourism was such a big part and has been such a big part of Cuba. What has been the impact on the sector of tourism? Both of those pieces. How are you addressing this, the day-to-day Cubans, the Cuban population of 12 million? Share something with us, Ambassador.
Yes, well, if you allow me, Walter, let me give you some data, I mean, for you to, and your audience to understand our numbers. I mean, the way COVID is impacting Cuba. As we speak, I mean, this is the last report we got from our authorities. We have had so far 1729 cases, I mean, total. Most of them are recovered now. 1031 have, 1,031 have been recovered so far, more than half. For the last week, we have been reported more people recovered than active cases. Now, we have had also 73 deaths so far, which is very, very regrettable, but still a very low number compared to other countries in the area. If you allow me, probably later we can compare those numbers with what is going on in the United States and probably Florida, which is the closest state to us. It's useful also to understand the way we are facing this in terms of the system. I mean, how the system is working. Today, we confirmed 26 new cases, but most of them, 61%, were asymptomatic. What that means? That means that the system is able to trace where the new cases would be considering the previous contacts. I mean, because every time we confirm a new case, we ask the person where you have been before. Were you with the family? Were you attending any social activity? And then we are able to trace where they were and to conduct tests on people who are potential positive cases. In many, many countries, the numbers are limited to how many people are coming to the hospitals. I mean, but the local authorities are not aware about how many cases they really have on the street. And they are, in many cases, caught by surprise, and they have the possibility to act only when you have a sick person. In the way we are facing this, it's important when we go and we trace a case, although it's asymptomatic, we provide drugs that most of them develop in Cuba to help the patients, the immune system to react to the disease. Then our point is, as early as you can know that a person could be potentially sick, as early as you can help him or her with the immune system, the better chances she or he has.
Okay.
But again, it's only when you have one system from the hospital to the clinics, to the community, how people get involved in this, how people react, how knowledgeable they are, and they are educated in this. As you mentioned, we have shortages. We have to remember, and I said in a previous interview, that we are facing now actually two different pandemics, the American blockade on Cuba for 60 years, and the COVID-19. And although we have limits, resources, although the blockade is in place, and you have heard the news about how many we have been trying to get some products and items from different countries, different companies, they haven't been allowed, people who receive a fine for doing trade with Cuba. Then among those limitations, we have the resources locally in Cuba to help the patient. You asked a particular question about elderly homes. We had regrettably one case in the province of Villa Clara where we had several cases, but when we knew about that immediately, our health system went to the place, isolated the person who were at that home, and we had to regret only 2 deaths there, but most of them are recovering safe now. As you know, we closed the country very early. That in terms of foreign travel, and that's important. That the authorities could react timely to that. We suspended tourism. We limited local transportation and people moving from one province to the other. We closed the schools. We almost shut down the whole education activity in Cuba and other activities that we don't consider essential for the economy. But at the same time, we kind of isolated specific areas. We had a strict quarantine on those neighborhoods, sometimes 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Those neighborhoods when we knew that there were several cases at one time. And it's important to do that, and it's important that the population understand that is another measure to limit the disease from spreading all over the place. Those communities who were isolated, the local government, the local authorities provided all services from food. And these days we have hundreds of very old people in Cuba, and our population is getting older and older. We have a lot of elderly people that they don't have a family, they live alone, and the community by itself is bringing them food and other services they need, just to prevent them from going outside and going to stores or other places. Then we as a society, as a country, we are pulling together, no matter how many limits we have. And you asked also about tourism. Well, we are calculating the impact, of course, that will have a severe impact on our income, on our resources, our budget this year. But we will share not only what we have, but also the impact as we have done in previous cases. Our 11 million Cubans will face same shortages, same limitations, but we understand that we are in a capacity to alleviate the consequences precisely because of this, because the Cuban government have the resources. It's not about people with high income and people with a low income. We will pull all together.
Okay. Ambassador Cabañas, we were listening with Ambassador José Ramón Cabañas, who is the Cuban ambassador to the United States. You're listening to a webcast being sponsored by Global Exchange, IFCO Pastors for Peace, Respect Cuba, with the support also of the National Network on Cuba. And you can put your questions in the chat room. I think one of the reasons, Ambassador Cabañas, that there's been increasing interest in Cuba and having this dialogue has been that since the British cruise ship of early March, we've seen, you can't avoid the news that there are Cuban doctors and medical people not only going to countries, but going to countries also to train people. Angola, Togo, the Caribbean, etc. Going back to the Pakistans and the Ebolas, etc. Explain to us in a short phrase here, how is it possible for a country of 12 million people that you talked about in terms of the issues that you face, external and internal, to be able to provide this level or these levels of medical outreach on the other side of the world?
Well, a short response to that is probably we are small by size and GNP, but we are big by heart. You know? And if you remember Jose Marti, our national hero, he was probably a global patriot. I mean, he said our homeland is humankind. I mean, we belong to the world. And since very early in our war of independence, first we have to remember that we received support from patriots from several countries and continents. And our people fighting for independence, they felt that they have to respond and they have to, in some way, to give back what the benefits they receive. Is our history with Africa, for instance. Now, in terms of numbers, and Dr. Barber mentioned some of those elements to respond to your question. But in terms of some numbers, let's remember that as we speak, we have 25 brigades in 23 different countries. But this is on top of the people we had already in 59 countries around the world. In places like Haiti, you mentioned the earthquake. And I remember when our experts arrived in Haiti to help the country to get back on track, many foreign experts were asking our doctors, when did you arrive? And they said, no, we were here from well before. And when most people left Haiti, our people remain. And currently, we have roughly 500 experts in Haiti, not only fighting COVID, but fighting other diseases as well. This is a long history. The first medical cooperation project we had back in 1963 in Algeria, in Africa. And since then, it has grown fast, I would say. You asked Dr. Barber on ILAM. ILAM was a project, structured by Comandante Fidel Castro back in 1998, when we had the Mitch storm in Central America. And Fidel asked, well, probably we can send some doctors there and help them to recover. But what will happen next? I mean, we have to create some local capacity, human resources for people, have some resilience to this kind of events. And you name it, we created we sent not only doctors, and we brought people from those countries to study in Cuba. But for instance, now I think on Gambia, an African country, very small, limited resources country in Africa, where we created the Faculty of Medicine. They never had a Faculty of Medicine, and now they enjoy that and they graduate people locally. I mean, it's a way to give back. If you are always concerned about budgets and funding, well, probably your accomplishments will be limited. But if you have and you really believe that supporting each other and having solidarity is a way to move forward, I have no doubts you can accomplish many, many things.
Mm-hmm. On the question of how these medical brigades operate, I understand that there's compensation for the medical brigade, but I also understand that there is the ability of Cuba to provide services when services are needed. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. There is a variety of options there. In some cases, countries are able to provide compensations quite clearly. In other cases, they can't. And we take most of the expenses. In other cases, it's related to some funding from World Health Organization or PAHO, I mean, locally in this continent. But there is a variety of options. And I have to say that among these 25 brigades, most of them they are present now in several countries dealing with patients directly. In a few cases, 2 or 3, we send simply experts that are exchanging information and expertise with local authorities, but they are not dealing directly with the patient. But people are thankful because of that, because we explain the way we organize the service in Cuba.
Mm-hmm. I'm reading a comment here from President, from President Miguel Diaz-Canel, and he's speaking at the recent online summit, non-aligned summit. And quoting from him, he says, COVID-19 has proved to be a global challenge. It goes beyond borders, ideologies, or levels of development. Therefore, the answer to it must be global and joint, and it should put political differences aside. Your thoughts on that notion, Ambassador Cabañas?
Well, definitely, Walter. Anyone who has been dealing with sciences, I mean, anyone attending college or any level in education, you know that sciences is a collective thing, and health is a collective. And when I say collective, it's all over the world. All countries, no matter how developed you are, how a large budget you have, you need cooperation from others, and you need to exchange information with others. This pandemic has shown the world that we cannot be isolated to face major challenges like this. Disasters, natural disasters, climate change, diseases. Our president mentioned, I mean, you quoted really well from him. He said also that if we would have been able to globalize solidarity and not only the market, we will be in a different position now. Hopefully, this pandemic will tell everyone that we need to cooperate. As Dr. Barber mentioned before, there is a long path of cooperation between experts from the United States and Cuba. We have been insisting these days that we should expand that dialogue and that conversation that is taking place at the individual level, in some cases from institutions to institutions. We had the opportunity to help to arrange a large conversation last Tuesday among Cuban experts and American experts dealing directly with COVID. It was a private initiative, but they wanted to know from each other how they are facing this and exchanging information. We have no doubts in our minds that only through multilateral cooperation and in some cases bilateral dialogue is the only chance we have to face this.
Cuba has sent medical people to so many countries, and I hearken back to a couple of points over the last several years. One, of course, was the efforts and the work on ALBA, which was obviously an alternative to those bodies that came out of the Bretton Woods Conference, the IMF and the World Bank. Also, Cuba has been very involved, aside from its medical work, with the notion of establishing the Caribbean as a zone of peace. I'm interested in the way in which you cooperated with the countries in the Americas, Bolivia, the way in which you cooperated in terms of beyond medical work, but establishing relationships in the area of the Caribbean and South America. Your work there from Cuba, Ambassador Cabañas.
Yes, well, our immediate neighborhood, I would say, is the Caribbean island states, brothers and sisters. You know, with economies in general, that they don't have probably enough resources to be fighting back against a crisis like this. I mean, a pandemic like this. It's a long-lasting cooperation for many, many years. Remember, the Caribbean states were the first in this hemisphere to reestablish, and in many cases, establish for the first time bilateral ties with Cuba when we were under sanctions from OAS and other local organizations.
That's CARICOM you're speaking of.
That's right. And I would say the second community will be a larger community, including all Latin American countries, different sizes of countries, different opportunities. But even with them, we establish bilateral cooperation and in some cases multilateral cooperation for over the years. Some people have tried to politicize this, and some people have been trying to look at this through the lenses of political parties, politics in general. I can tell you over the years, we had our presence of cooperators, experts in those countries, no matter who was the president, no matter what party was leading the country. And but again, some people under the pressure of officials from Washington, they simply canceled those agreements and they requested our experts to leave, and we did. We have no issues with that. But now, currently, as we speak, the population is simply suffering the impact because no one replaced the Cuban experts. I mean, it's not about, well, I do have the capacity to do this with someone else. It's that people left and no one replaced them. And then the local population is suffering the impact. We have many examples to put forward in terms of sustaining that this is a cooperation simply for the benefit and the wealth of the local population. But again, we are not the ones politicizing this.
There's been a call by a number of countries and bodies around the world, including the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the Group of 77, the European Union, the non-aligned countries, to either temporarily suspend and to end sanctions against Cuba and other countries, Cuba being one of a number of countries which has sanctions against it. Where is that particular movement at? And speak to that, Ambassador Cabañas.
Well, as you said, we have had a variety of statements in that sense. We have sustained over the years that the American blockade, in this particular case against Cuba, is immoral, is illegal, it is a genocide. I mean, because of the consequences. If we consider the depreciation of dollars, it would be right now, the cost for Cuba in terms of money, of funds, or economic impact, almost $1 trillion. But that has also an impact on our population. I mean, the many people who didn't get a particular drug or treatment or medical device right in time, and the way our local programs have been affected. Is if the blockade has been immoral and has made no sense over the years, because by the way, all people know that it's a failed policy, even those who support the blockade. Well, under the current circumstances, it makes less sense to keep pushing on people. We have sustained that. We have made a sample of that. Currently, American authorities say, well, we allow and we provide licensing. No, as we speak, they keep tracking that and they go after every company doing business with Cuba, international banks. It's very difficult for us to go ahead with financial transactions. And, well, they will keep pressing. Some people believe now they have an opportunity to finally defeat the Cuban Revolution. It won't happen. 12 different American presidents have been facing this, and most of the political class in the United States understand it's a failed policy. We thank all those leaders and organizations that they have had those statements. When we think about unilateral coercive measures, they have to be lifted no matter what, not only because of the pandemic. I mean, but even under the pandemic, the blockade means more difficulties for us, for sure.
How do you, a question coming to me, I've been giving you some of the questions from the chat room, and there's a couple more in the time that we have. How do you have this dialogue on a day-to-day level with Cuban citizens? Certainly one time it was a special period, but now that you find a situation where Cuba is helping all of the world and the challenges to the economic and social system in Cuba are great, where does this dialogue occur that people understand and can be supported and adjust to all the challenges that come from having a very, very difficult moment in a small country, as I've said before, not necessarily a wealthy country in terms of raw materials. How do you do this? What is this dialogue, Ambassador Cabañas?
Well, this is an ongoing dialogue, Walter, has been for 60 years, and it's an ongoing dialogue on the street. I mean, in the case of Cuba, don't think about, and as you know very well, but I mean your audience, don't think about a government located in one particular facility, just having meetings and receptions, and the people, isolated completely from the population. From our national level, and you have seen reports, our president simply walking on the street and visiting communities, our ministers doing the same, responding to the local population, not through emails or through video conferences, but on a natural dialogue and a daily dialogue on the streets. Same thing for governors, same thing for leaders, local leaders. Then our people is not only that they understand, but our population understands, but also that supports. And those physicians now being part of the brigades in 25 countries, they come from different provinces and different neighborhoods. And it's amazing how those neighborhoods and provinces and communities, they say farewell to those who leave. And when they receive them back, how proud they are, because a local physician, a local expert provided that support, that help internationally. Remember that the Cuban population, I mean, we are a very educated country in terms of higher education. I mean, percentage of undergrads and postgrads among our 11 million people. We know very well about history. We know very well about what is going on worldwide, usually, but specifically under the pandemic. And our population understands very well our role in the world and has been part of that, of course.
We have so many. I think when I wrote you and we were sharing questions back and forth, you wrote to me this morning, you said, well, those are good questions, Walter, but that's 2 or 3 hours of questions. I know we don't have you for 2 or 3 hours, but we want to take a few more questions here before we go forward. I did see a notice from U.S. congressional representatives who were asking that interferon alpha 2B be able to be used in the United States. I know that Native nations, indigenous populations in Canada have made the same request. The thoughts on this, is this too far away to think about? Your thoughts on this, Ambassador Cabañas, this thought that if it is a pandemic, then the borders in terms of just humanity should change in terms of the United States and the use of interferon alpha 2B.
Yeah, as part of among the 23 MOUs we signed it with the previous administration, there was one specifically on health. And I can tell you, there has been several comprehensive official dialogues in the past among our experts. I said before that these days our experts are talking. I mean, the two scientific communities, the United States and Cuba, they have been in permanent contact for the last 150 years. They know each other very well. They know about the research, what they are doing, how they can complement each other. And your scientific community in United States is pretty well aware about the kind of drugs we are developing in Cuba, our accomplishments, results, etc., 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 and the population as well. Now, interferon alpha 2B has been mentioned several times. I said before, we are using 22 different drugs we have developed in Cuba. The national media has been informing all these days about drugs that we created with a specific approach or goal. Now we realize that they are useful also under this pandemic, because there is no, as you know, there is no final treatment. But we have several drugs. If you try to enhance the immune system of the patient, you can use a combination of different drugs. Then The experts in the United States, the federal agencies, they know what we are producing in Cuba. You have our own regulations. I mean, FDA has to approve any drug that would be used in the United States. Now, to respond specifically to your question, remember that in 2017 was approved the first joint venture in biotechnology, and it's the only one we have, considering all other sectors, between an American institution, which is Roswell Park Cancer Center in New York, and a Cuban center, Molecular Immunology Center, to do joint research on Symavax, which is a vaccine against lung cancer. And they are working. They have been working for 3 years now. Simply as an example of how a very well-known institution in the United States gets in contact with a counterpart in Cuba, they make a proposal, and federal authorities respond to that. We can talk about cancer. We can talk about heart diseases, brain diseases. You mentioned diabetes. For many years, we have been using in Cuba and abroad a vaccine called Heverprot-P. In Cuba, we have been able to to stop 73% of the amputations because of the use of that drug. Imagine in the United States, you have roughly 50 to 60,000 amputations a year linked to diabetes. Think about stopping all that nightmare for the patient and for the families and for the family budget as a consequence of the amputations. Well, you can cut that by 73%. Like that, if we talk about animal health or phytosanitary controls, many things we could do jointly in all those sectors.
I wanted to ask a question from my area specifically, and as I look through Cuba going back to the days of Che Guevara, has had a long presence on the African continent, obviously with the Amilcar Cabral and the Tricentennial Conference, and a number of other issues. Cuba recently, I know, has sent medical assistance to countries such as Togo and Angola, and also a large contingent recently arrived in the country of South Africa. This long-standing relationship with Africa, not only bringing students to Elam. Talk a bit about why that's been important to Cuba in terms of its internationalism, specifically the African continent.
Well, specifically with Africa, well, remember that when our troops were in Angola fighting against the South African apartheid, Fidel was asked several times actually, why Cuba was helping Angola, and by the way, Namibia, fighting against the apartheid. We have done that before in Guinea-Bissau and other African countries. And Fidel said simply, we are giving back what Africa brought to us. I mean, by history, by nature, in our blood, we have African blood. We all know how the Cuban population and the Cuban nationhood was built on slaves coming from Africa, mixed with the Spaniards and even Chinese and people coming from Asia. But particularly with Africa, remember that those slave ships that came from Nigeria and surrounding countries came first to Havana or Santiago de Cuba, then they stopped in Florida or the Carolinas. And when we say that families were divided and one part of the family remained in Cuba and the second part is, the descendants are currently in the United States, is like that. Humankind came from Africa. Even those guys living now in Europe, they originated in Africa. Then we are connected in one way or the other with Africa, no doubt culturally. We are almost half Africans, I would say. And anytime you have had the opportunity yourself, but other people to understand how it happened, the way a Cuban citizen, a Cuban doctor, or a Cuban expert, or a Cuban student is welcome in Africa. I can tell you my personal practice as a diplomat. Cuba have attended meetings of the African group as any other country. I mean, coming from Africa. For Africans, Cuba is a neighbor, is a friend, is a brother. We have felt very close over the years.
A few more questions. One larger question before we come to, and also to share with you that I'm hearing that the Richmond Regla Friendship Committee, sister city, has worked with Richmond, California, to pass a resolution supporting allowing scientific and medical collaboration between the U.S. and Cuba. This notion of groups such as the NNOC and Global Exchange and Center for Cuban Studies and Pastors for Peace and Respect and so many different organizations, Proximity, who support Cuba. How does this work for you? What does this mean for you to hear news that there is a community in Richmond, California, that is taking these particular steps, or the NNOC, which is very, very active, or the Cuba Sea work, which comes out of New Jersey and New York?
Well, to summarize, let's say that it's very, very important, that we appreciate that a lot. There is a history, local cities, local councils, or people, simply local population, asking the leaders to pass some resolutions and statements in that regard. You mentioned the case of Richmond. It was the first local authority, I mean the council, that passed a resolution against the blockade. And as we speak, they are asking to lift the sanctions on Cuba, at least during the pandemic. Those organizations, united as part of the national network on Cuba, for many, many years, they have been saying the truth about Cuba. They have been explaining people our common history. They have been an important linkage to bring messages of solidarity from the United States to Cuba, and to explain in Cuba how the large majority of the American population simply supports a different kind of policy towards Cuba. Reverend Lucious Walker was mentioned before by Dr. Barber, IFCO, Pastors for Peace, but people who are, as you said, the whole idea about bringing American students to ELAM in Cuba came up at the dialogue between Fidel and the Black Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus. And sometimes, I mean, there are different personalities and organizations that are a fundamental part of this story, you know. But some people could feel, well, how important it is a city like Richmond, you know, to pass a resolution on this. People will feel, well, the main debate is at the federal Congress. No, it's important, no matter where, no matter how, that message go through, that people can talk to politicians that represent them at the state level, city level, but at the federal level as well. And I have to say, quite frankly, and I witnessed that process, if we ever go to the moment in which we reestablish bilateral links, diplomatic links, we haven't had the opportunity yet to normalize bilateral links, but we reopen embassies. If we go to that point, is in a very important and substantive way because of the support of the solidarity movement in the United States. If we got to the point in which the Cuban Five were liberated and are back in Cuba, it's because of the support of the solidarity movement in the United States. Makes no doubts about that. I mean, without the support of you, Global Exchange, Respect Cuba, the National Network, all those organizations, and I have to say, it's a very long list of organizations. In many cases, people who are Hispanic descendants, native. You mentioned the original nations in the United States. They for years they have been in contact with Cuban counterparts, and they have been looking for cooperation and to expand bilateral ties.
I think the one of the questions here is there a moment when is there any foreplanning in terms of when Cuba may open up again or be able to open up to tourism. And I say that because many of the organizations you talk about, people who become exposed to Cuba, it's because they've been able to travel to Cuba. They've been able to walk the streets and meet with Cuban organizations and institutions. Any thoughts, any timelines? What are the parameters there, Ambassador Cabañas?
Well, travel has been an important element, a key to bring people closer and to bring people together. That's why our enemies, and when I say our enemies, it's not only Cuban enemies, but your enemies as well. I mean, people, they don't want you and me to talk about this and to know each other better, are so afraid about travel because 90% of people returning from Cuba, the first things that they say when they land back in the United States is, well, you know what? Cuba is not what I was told it was. It's something different. And for most of them, is more positive than negative, you know? No matter how many measures and new regulation has been put in place by this administration, the current administration, to squeeze Cuba to implement the blockade further, during 2019, 18, and 17, I mean, 3 years in a row, more than 1 million Americans and Cuban Americans altogether traveled to Cuba. Imagine 1 million people coming back and forth, sharing information with relatives, sharing information with neighborhoods. I have to say, frankly, when you have the genius out of the lamp, it's difficult to put the genius back on the lamp. And after so many years, so many people traveling to Cuba and knowing firsthand about what is going on, you can have as many official statements as you want, statements from the State Department, people trying to demonize Cuba. By the way, most of them, they receive funding from the federal budget in the United States. But Americans know, and by large numbers, they know. No matter if you are an old person or a young person, think about what has been going on the last years in culture and cultural exchange. Remember the festival at the Kennedy Center. Remember the Jazz Fest in New Orleans. Remember the Cinema Fest in New York. How many Cuban artists has come to the United States and vice versa? How many artists has traveled, American artists traveling to Cuba? Then there is a knowledge that is there. We have our enemies in Congress. We have several politicians, they don't like Cuba. But you know what? We are neighbors. We are very close. No matter what, we have to share knowledge and we have to negotiate on many aspects. For instance, if we want to keep a clean Caribbean Sea, we have to avoid oil spill no matter what. And we have to cooperate. And United States experts, they know that in Caribbean terms, cooperation with Cuba is useful for the purpose. If we want to fight drug trafficking, if we want to keep our civil aviation, travel in this area safe, if we would provide search and rescue services for people navigating in the Florida Strait, we have to cooperate. For instance, NOAA, your service, is blind if they don't share information with us on hurricanes impacting the Caribbean, and they have been sharing information for many years. Okay. Then that idea that United States in many aspects could isolate from Cuba and from Cuban institutions and can do well in many subjects, or vice versa. I mean, we can be isolated from what the United States can offer is nonsense. And we all know that through cooperation, we can accomplish many things. And quite frankly, we know that we will have our differences. We know very well where our differences are, and we can talk about them for years.
You've been an ambassador for a number of years, Ambassador Cabañas, and you've seen the evolution of Cuba-U.S. relationships and had high-level talks and Cuban citizens, et cetera. In your dream of how we can move forward from what's been the state of relationships over the last 60 years, what are the key elements that give people on both sides of the Caribbean Sea, in Cuba and in the United States, and globally in some senses, a chance to look at something better than the last 60 years?
Well, we have had our moments of negotiation and agreement. We have discussed our differences, and we have been able, in some cases, to clear them. And we have had moments in which the tension and the polarization have been very meaningful, like right now, quite frankly. Now, to be objective, and we have to be objective, and to be objective, we have to dream, as Che Guevara said at some point. And no matter what, at some point, we have to sit and talk again. And we have to go back to the situation where we were late 2016, early 2017, because I have to say that even under the current administration, there was some talk and some exchange. And as we speak, for instance, Coast Guard, they have a cooperation and a dialogue with Cuban Tropas Guardafronteras, because they have common issues in the Caribbean. We have to go back to those topics. 2015 and 2016 are important years in terms of how many agreements we were able to reach. We reached them simply because we were able to talk with mutual respect and reciprocity. Anytime we have those two preconditions, we firmly know that we are able to get some kind of agreement in those areas where we have common ground. Then it's solid. I mean, we have to get back to that point to address many issues. We have talked about how to face a pandemic like this one. No one could say this will be the last pandemic we will face, and probably we will have a second or a third part of COVID-19. We still don't know. Then if we want to live in a better hemisphere, if we want to live in a better world, all countries should sit at the table and should negotiate the differences. No doubt in my mind.
Okay. We want to thank both Dr. Melissa Barber and Ambassador José Ramón Cabañas for being part of this evening's special webcast sponsored by Global Exchange, IFCO, Pastors for Peace, Respect Cuba, the National Network on Cuba. Again, a very, very special thanks to Ambassador Cabañas for taking time from obviously a very, very busy schedule to share with us and to share with us with openness and transparency about his country. This program was recorded and will be archived on the Global Exchange website. You can take a look at www.globalexchange.org. And again, for all the participants and for you, Ambassador Cabañas and Dr. Barber, thanks again. And please stay safe. And we hope to see you at a point when relations are much better than they are now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Walter, for having us. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Total pleasure.